Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to Dick and Patsy Brescia, to all of our office studio guests, BBK staff and senior management, and to all of you who are tuning in on the internets. My name is Matt Kibby, and on behalf of BBK Worldwide's Pharma15 live series, it is my privilege, nay pleasure, to welcome you all warmly here today. So thanks very much. We are absolutely delighted to have you all here with us to share and even to participate in this discussion. I'm going to be here interviewing Dick, but if any of you have any questions that you would like to ask of Dick or myself, then of course the folks here within the audience can submit those questions to people at the back. And on the internet, you can type in those questions. We will do our best to get to as many of those questions at the end of this discussion as we possibly can within what time permits. Okay, so I'm going to set this up a little bit just before we get into the conversation with Dick here. And I just would like to say that the focus on science and logistics of creating, planning, running clinical trials can often mean that the patient perspective and experience gets a little lost in the sauce. BBK Worldwide is actively committed to raising awareness about patient and caregiver experiences and illustrating how even a small attendance to those details can be profoundly impactful on the involvement and the well-being of patients and caregivers in clinical trials. So today's conversation is going to serve to highlight that and illustrate what it means from the patient's perspective. So we are honored to have Dick Brescia here with us today. Dick is a husband, a father, an octogenarian, and to my bemused colleagues at the back, that means he's in his 80s, not that he has 8 limbs. And I've been told he's so stinking cute as well. And that wasn't me, that was from your daughter. And I'm adding that hastily because you still look like you could take me pretty easily. You look fantastic, by the way. Thank you. Yeah. So Dick is a survivor of head and neck squamous cell cancer and a clinical trial participant. And that's what we're here to talk about today. So we'll get right into it. And my first question is to say, before you were correctly diagnosed with your disease, it was your dentist, if I'm not mistaken, it was your dentist that thought that you'd had a stroke. Is that correct?
Correct.
Great. So how did you come to actually, become diagnosed correctly and then participate in a clinical trial?
Well, the dentist, and I'm sure you've all been to a dentist at one time or another, spend a lot of time in your mouth. And the tongue happens to be a major portion of that part of your body. And she was noticing that my tongue was not functioning the way it normally should. And she asked me if I had ever had a stroke. I told her no. And she said, well, I think you have. And I'm going to call the hospital, the emergency room, and have them come right here and pick you up and take you to the hospital. I told her she wasn't going to do that, but she could call, and I would drive my car home, which she told me no, I wasn't going to do, but if I did. And I said, I'll wait for them. So I drove home, much to her angst, but she got even with me by immediately calling the emergency room. And by the time I got home and parked the car, the ambulance had pulled into the driveway and they were ready to take me up. And I went through the usual procedures in several tests to see if the brain was functioning or not. And if indeed I had a stroke, everything came back saying, no, you didn't have a stroke. But there was a problem with the tongue and the swallowing. My cardiologist stopped in to say, I've just looked at all of the film that's come back, and you haven't had a stroke. I said, okay. In the back of my mind, I'm thinking, if this isn't a stroke and there's something wrong with that makes people think that I have had a stroke, I'm starting to narrow down what it could be, if it could be. And one of the options in the back of my mind is that it's cancer. They wound up giving me a swallow test to see what was going on with my throat and the tongue, and that's when they discovered that there was a tumor at the base of the tongue. So that's how we found out that the stroke was not a stroke, but was something physical.
And so then your dentist had actually recommended you go and see a doctor at Norwalk, near where you live, is that correct?
Well, the dentist demanded that I go to the hospital, and she didn't care which doctors I saw.
She demanded you?
Yeah, she demanded I go. And so at any rate, having that information, and the doctors, two of the surgeons came in, I guess to support each other, because it's a tough announcement to give to a patient. But I was kind of anticipating it, so it wasn't a total shock. And I told them, okay, now what do I do? I want to be proactive about this thing. And they said, well, immediately go back and talk to a doctor, see if you can set up an appointment somewhere. We had an appointment set up almost immediately to go to Yale, to the Smilo Cancer Center, and that was set up. In addition, the dentist, as you know, had worked with one of the leading doctors in Sloan Kettering, and she called him to set up an appointment for me. We had established the fact that we were going to go to Yale and meet their team there, but at the same time, the opportunity to get to Sloan Kettering, which had a great reputation and was something that I was very impressed with, provided an opportunity to go in and see this particular doctor. And so we did. And he confirmed what it was, that it was cancer, that it was kind of a large tumor, and it was inoperable, but treatable. We told him that we had also scheduled an appointment to see the folks at Yale. He was very encouraging about that because Yale was a lot more accessible for us. We live in Norwalk, Connecticut.
So Sloan Kettering, to the uninitiated, is in New York City?
In New York City, that's where we were. So he encouraged us, and he also knew many of the people that would be treating me, because he had worked with some of them and interacted, and so he had high things to say about that, and also said that he would be willing to consult if it was needed. You know, obviously Sloan Kettering would have been my first choice, just based on their reputation. But I think he made the right decision in giving us a suggestion, and we made the right decision in going to the Smilo Cancer Center in Yale.
You thought that would be easier on you?
Easier on me from a travel point of view.
Yeah.
Moving from, I had worked in New York City for over 40 years. And commuting into New York is one difficult thing when you're going on the train. Trying to drive in every day and find a parking space and get to where you want to go is almost impossible, almost like Boston. But at any rate, with that in mind, the facility, the ease to get to New Haven seemed to be a dominating factor.
Yeah.
And then when we met the people at Yale, I felt very comfortable about that. So.
You're sort of taking your life into your hands going into New Haven most of the time anyway, really.
On Route 95, yes, indeed, to a degree, yes.
So, and that's when you actually were introduced to a Dr. Barbara Burtness.
Barbara Burtness, right.
And so she was, I believe, the oncologist in a team of doctors that was helping to treat you.
I would imagine that that's the situation in most hospitals where you have a team of people. And so I had a surgeon, and I had a radiologist, and I had the oncologist. The oncologist was Barbara Burtness, and she was kind of the lead person in that because she was the one I interacted with mostly. And she was the one that brought up the issue of a trial.
So you didn't actually ask about participating in a clinical trial?
Not at all.
And so she asked you to participate?
Yes, she did. Yes, she did. I'm worried about staying alive and taking care of cancer. And Barbara brought up the fact, would I participate in a trial, which they were using to create a base of information for research on cancer. And my first reaction to her was, will it help me? And this is why I love Barbara. She said, I can't tell you that this trial will help you. And I said, okay, will it help other people? Will it help other researchers? Will it help the doctors? Will it help us try to find a cure for that? She said, I can tell you that it will help on that front. So she was honest in that it wasn't going to particularly help me, but that it might serve a purpose. And I don't know about other people, but in my situation, lending that kind of gravitas to the healing process was important to me. And I said, sure, let's do it. Let's be part of this trial.
I find that particularly moving. I mean, maybe it's the cynic in me, but I don't necessarily see a whole lot of altruism being something that drives a lot of people into clinical trials anymore. And I know that, historically, I was talking with some members of the audience earlier, but historically, cancer trial participation amongst adults in particular is pretty low. You regularly get statistics of 3 to 5%. That's 1 in 20 people participating in cancer trials. That can vary depending upon the type of cancer. But if you contrast that with children, it's usually 60 to 70% of children in clinical trials. But you were saying that this was something that was important to you because of the effects, the knock-on effects, paying it forward.
I'm not knocking on the door of sainthood here. That's a personal decision that everyone has to make. To me, it lent some meaning to what I was going to be going through. I knew it wasn't going to be a walk in the park, and I was hopeful that the results of both the trial and the treatment would be positive. But it was also important to try to see if there would be more meaning to it. And so from my point of view, a personal point of view, that was important, and it was a motivating factor for me. You're right, I don't think it is. I think Dr. Burtness felt the same way, that she wished that more and more adults would participate in the trial, but she understood the reticence on their part.
And so obviously, so the first doctor that you'd spoken to in Sloan Kettering, and then was somebody who was recommended to you as a world-class doctor, and then you were recommended over to go back into Yale. You met with Dr. Barbara Burtness. Can you talk a little bit about how your relationship developed with Dr. Burtness and the staff at Yale, and how important that was to you over time?
Yes, we've talked about this before. As I said, Dr. Burtness was kind of the lead person. She was leading with the test, and then she was going to be one of the lead people, if not the lead people, during the course of the treatment. The trial test in the beginning was about 5 days. The treatment itself was 8 weeks, and daily the radiologist was I didn't see them on a daily basis, but I saw the people in the radiology department every day, and the oncology was once a week. But I was constantly in contact with Dr. Burtness. I had great confidence in her with her honesty with me in the beginning, talking about whether or not this would help me or help others, so that developed a bond in which I think we communicated well with each other. She's always been very straightforward and honest with me. But the thing that helped during this period of time that Matt had just referred to is both my wife and I found that the personnel at Memorial at Yale at the Cancer Center were tremendous. I'm talking about everybody. They were very welcoming. It could be a maintenance person, it could be a surgeon, it could be nurses, it could be other physicians who would stop you in the hall and say, do you know where you're going, or do you need help on anything? And this is a daily occurrence every time we're there. So that ambiance, I think, does add to a feeling of a comfort when you're going in for treatment. So it was not that any hospital is welcoming, but the people were welcoming, yes.
I think that that's a particularly important aspect to emphasize in terms of the quality of the care that you received there and how you felt as a patient, because I think that one of the great barriers to clinical trial participation is people's worry that it means actually a diminished level of care, or that they may be sort of seen as last resort. There's something they do as a last resort. So, but actually I think that your experience about receiving something that seems more than what you may have received normally is actually a common one in clinical trials. So.
I think the term trial may be off-putting at times, unless you've got someone on the medical staff, as I had with Dr. Burtness, who will explain the meaning of trial and why it's important. So I think that's an important thing, because the term itself, what does that mean? Am I in a test tube or something like this? So I think you're right. That's.
So let's move on a little bit to talk about your caregiving team. Obviously, you know, I mentioned, and I was thanking Patsy, your wife, who's here with us, I think in the green room right now. But also your nuclear family and extended family were also involved in being part of that caregiver group. So you have this great relationship with the doctor, and you have this great relationship with your caregiver team. Can you talk a little bit about how that helped your involvement in clinical trials too?
Well, particularly as you go through the treatments, I can assure you, you don't get stronger when you're going through the radiation and any of the oncology treatments. Patsy and I were very fortunate. We had our 3 kids, 2 daughters and a son, who were helpful. We had daughter-in-laws who were helpful. We even had grandchildren that were helpful. And the primary area was in driving and getting us from where we were in Norwalk to New Haven. Now, that's not a major drive. It's about a 30, 35-minute drive.
Okay.
But it's on Route 95, which is a major highway, and the traffic can be difficult at times. And so it's not a stress-free, even though it's a shorter road, it's not a stress-free experience. And I didn't have to worry about it. If Patsy was driving, or Bonnie was driving, or Jeff was driving, or someone, or my son Steve, or Tina, they were doing the driving. I didn't have to worry about anything except being quiet, sitting in the seat, and try to be as comfortable as I can. So that, but I had a lot of people who were able to give me help.
That's not the experience of everybody, obviously, of course. And so,
I don't think so. No.
I think another study that I was reading that was published in Forbes, actually in February, was talking about how that potentially more than 50% of patients with cancer don't live within a close proximate distance to the centers that are conducting these kinds of clinical trials, and actually don't have extended family to be able to help them do those journeys.
Yeah.
So Patsy did a lot of the driving for you, and so let me ask you now. So, obviously this was a burden on you to try to get just even to Yale. It would have been even more had you been going to New York City and back for this particular kind of treatment.
Very much so, yes.
So did the group at Yale actually offer you any kind of assistance in getting to and from your residence to the clinical trial visits?
No, the basic assistance was once we got there. If I was there for the daily treatments for radiology, they had a special place where we could park. So we knew that if we were driving in, we didn't have to search for a parking space or look up on the garage for a parking space. There was a location for us to park the car, get out, and at one point during that treatment with the radiologist, I needed a wheelchair to get from the sidewalk in. So they did provide that kind of thing, but there was nothing as far as moving from one point to another. As you might expect, Matt and I have discussed this subject before. This isn't the first time that's come up. And I remember way back in the beginning when they asked me if I would sit here and talk with you, if I would do that and to help give a perspective from a patient's point of view. And he asked about the issue of driving, and did I think that would have been a valuable offering if there was some way that the family could get from Norwalk to Yale without having to worry about members of the family driving. And my glib answer to him was, we don't have a problem at all. Well, I didn't have the problem because I wasn't doing the driving. And when I shared that conversation with my wife, daughter-in-law, and son, their responses, well, that was kind of a very selfish response to give on that thing. What, are you crazy? And I said, oh, okay, so why am I wrong on this thing? And the general response was, wouldn't it be better if we had someone driving you and we could sit in the back seat with you and talk about what was going to happen today, what questions we should ask, and what symptoms you should remember to describe and share with the doctors, and then talk in general about the strategy for what we're doing today with the treatment and how we're going to move forward. Eureka! I had a eureka moment, and I said, okay. I shared that with Matt. So the answer to that.
I scribbled that one down, the answer to that one.
The answer to that thing is that would have been very beneficial to us, and we had, as a family, the ability to get me from one place to another, but we didn't have the ability to have that discourse on what was going on and things we should be concerned about. And so we missed that, and that would be helpful.
Yeah, and I mean, in your eloquence, I even noted this down, and I'd said, these were your words, it's about being there for you in the moment, rather than being there to just navigate the traffic or anxiety. It extends the time they have to care for you. So in that sense, it would have been more meaningful than you had even realized at that point.
Absolutely,
yeah.
And
yeah. So I know that during the course of your treatment and your trial, I think the trial was actually just for 5 days prior to
5 days for the
prior to a treatment
to lead
period.
into the
Yeah.
trial lasted 8 weeks and 5 days. So,
But then Dr. Burtness was trying to be attentive to your needs or your desire potentially to be closer to home to have these treatments.
yes,
And so she offered, or she said to you, would it be beneficial for you to go back and actually receive these treatments in Norwalk? Is that correct?
yes. This time I decided to share that question with Patsy, and we both came up with the same answer. It might be, but we felt that the trips to Yale and the face-to-face with Dr. Burtness were very valuable to us, both mentally and physically. So we opted not to go closer to home because we wanted to be part of that experience at that Smilo.
Yeah, I mean, that's just going back to the whole thing where Dr. Shah was even saying, Dr. Shah from Sloan Kettering, who was
Right.
basically saying, hey, why don't you go to Yale? But even at that point, the relationship with the doctor was so important to you. That's not something that was not a bond that you were willing to break at that point.
Correct.
So that's,
Yeah.
okay. So I actually...
Let me just interrupt you.
Sure.
And I'll repeat what I've said before. In my case, having a feeling of confidence about the people who are trying to help you through this is a very important ingredient to try to recover from the treatment that you're getting. And so the confidence I had in the team at Yale and in Dr. Burtness herself was an important element for me. So that's why.
Yeah. I'd referenced a study that I'd recently come across, and it was from researchers from Columbia University and the American Cancer Society, and they had mentioned that more than 50% of patients didn't have options at their hospital to join clinical trials. And I'm just going to read a sentence or two from that particular report, and it said, patients can travel to other centers, and many do, but many more are hindered by the constraints of travel, having to take time off work, family constraints, and the cost of living, the cost of having to both travel to, this is my handwriting, have to travel to another location and potentially stay there for long periods to receive their care. Most clinical trials are conducted at big treatment centers, sometimes leaving patients who live far away from these centers with difficult choices. And so, as we sort of wind down this interview, I just wanted to ask you, as you think about the fact that patients who don't go to Dr. Shah or Dr. Burtness or doctors like them, because of those logistics or barriers, structural barriers like travel to participating in clinical trials, what would you say to those people, or to the institutions that were involved in those particular kinds of trials?
Well, again, based on what I've shared with you, and mostly what my support group has shared with me, I think it would be very important, again, from a psychological point of view, emotional point of view, if those patients that you're referring to that don't have the broad family support, even if they do have the broad family support that I had, if there was a way to alleviate the issue of stress and time to get from one place to another, that makes the healing process, I think, work a little bit better. And so I do think it would be valuable if there is something that could be provided for the people that you talk about that don't have that. And to me, it's an important thing.
So yeah, so focusing on that experience, on that what seems to be a small thing,
Right.
has a bigger impact on you, on your well-being, as I've mentioned.
I think so. Yeah.
Okay, and I just have one more I just have one more question, really, or one more statement here to say that you have an open floor. This is my last statement. Before we wrap up, is there anything else that you would like to say to other patients who are facing the decision to actually participate in a clinical trial, but may not have a strong support network as you? What would you say to those patients?
Well, it's tough to try to put yourself in someone else's position. And you know, altruism is a nice phrase to use. I'd like to find something that wasn't a little too lofty. But I would say that if the opportunity arises and your doctor, your caregiver asks you if you would want to be part of a trial, to look at that as a positive, as an opportunity to make something happen that may not be immediately good for you, but may help the researchers and the physicians and the doctors that are trying to find a cure for this disease. I think that's important. As I said before, I'm not in love with the term trial, but that's the phrase we're using. And so I would encourage you to give serious consideration to participating and helping, because while it may not immediately help you, although it might, the opportunity of helping fight this disease and finding a cure, I think is an important issue for you to consider.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
I just want, I'm kind of moved by this experience. It reminds me of the time my brother bought me a cheap thesaurus for a gift. I couldn't find the words to thank him.
Okay.
Thanks, Dick.
Thank you.